the first time Daniel saw Alina. She was standing at the far end of the old bridge that crossed the quiet river winding through their small town, her hair swaying with the evening breeze, her eyes fixed on the horizon as though she were searching for something the rest of the world could not see. It was early autumn then, the season when the leaves slowly die with such beauty that it almost makes you believe endings can be gentle too. Daniel had always loved this bridge, but that day he realized the bridge had never been beautiful until she stood on it. He didn't speak to her that day. Instead, he watched from a distance, feeling a strange tug inside him, as though the world had paused just to let him admire her. Later, he would often wonder whether their entire story had already begun at that moment, before the first hello, before the first smile, before the first stolen heartbeat. Because sometimes love starts quietly, without permission, just a single look long enough to change everything. Alina came to the small town of Riverview for reasons she never shared with anyone. She just appeared one day renting a tiny apartment above a flower shop, working part-time at the old bookstore, living as though she were passing through life silently. She greeted everyone with soft smiles, but the smile never fully reached her eyes. Daniel noticed everything. He wasn't the kind of man to fall easily or quickly, but once he did, he fell deeply, hopelessly, and with a sincerity few people in this world possess. He had grown up and raised by a mother who taught him kindness, and a father who taught him to protect the things he loved. He had a quiet life, morning jogs near the river, working at his friend's cafe, painting landscapes in his spare time. He never imagined someone like Alina would walk into the steady rhythm of his days and turn every beat into music. Their official first meeting happened inside the bookstore. It was raining that afternoon, the kind of soft, melodic rain that always made Daniel want a warm drink and a good book. He stepped inside the shop to buy an old poetry collection, and there she was, seated on a small wooden stool, arranging books on the lower shelves. She glanced up, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and said, "Welcome. Let me know if you need help." Her voice was soft, almost fragile, like a whisper made of light. For a moment, Daniel forgot how words worked. He simply nodded. He walked through the aisles, pretending to search for books, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. Finally, he gathered the courage to speak. "Do you have any Rilke poetry?" he asked. She smiled, an actual, gentle, warm smile. "I love Rilke," she replied, standing up. "He writes what the heart is afraid to confess." It was such a simple line, but it struck him deeply. She guided him to the poetry section, found the book, then handed it to him with a softness that made the world fade away. When he paid for it, she wrote something on a small slip of paper and tucked it inside the book. Later that night, when he opened it, he found her handwriting. "I hope you find what your heart is trying to say." He didn't sleep that night. In the following weeks, Daniel visited the bookstore more often, not because he needed more books, but because every moment near Alina felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. They began talking in small fragments about poetry, music, the river, the weather. He learned that she loved stargazing, that she disliked loud places, that she collected pressed flowers inside her notebooks, and that she found comfort in rainy days. But there were many things he didn't. No things she kept close, hidden behind that quiet smile. Their connection grew like a soft flames, lowly, beautifully, undeniably. One evening, Daniel found her again on the same bridge where he had first seen her. She was looking at the sky, the sunset melting into shades of orange and pink. He walked up beside her, and surprisingly, she didn't seem startled. Instead, she whispered, "Beautiful, isn't it?" He nodded. "It is," he said, but his eyes were on her. She didn't notice, or maybe she did, but pretended not to. They stood there in silence, and it was the kind of silence that felt like a conversation without words. When the air grew colder, Daniel offered her his jacket. She hesitated, then accepted it. That night, she walked home with him, and something delicate shifted between them, like the moment a flower begins to bloom. From that day on, they fell into each other's lives, naturally. They shared quiet evenings, long walks by the river, warm coffee in the cafe where Daniel worked. He drew sketches of landscapes, and sometimes unconsciously, he drew her silhouette. She read poetry aloud to him, her voice gentle enough to mend unseen wounds. She laughed more around him, and every time she did, he felt as though he had received a gift he didn't deserve, but treasured deeply. Daniel fell in love first. Alina tried not to. It wasn't that she didn't feel something, she did, deeply and painfully, but she was afraid of it. He could see it in her eyes sometimes. The fear behind the affection, the hesitation behind the smiles. One evening, as they sat on a bench near the river, watching the lanterns float on the water during the annual festival, Daniel finally confessed. "I don't know when it happened," he said, voice steady but heart trembling. "But I love you, Alina." She froze. The lantern lights reflected in her eyes, and for a long moment she didn't breathe. Then, in a whisper so quiet it broke him, she said, "Daniel, don't love me." He felt the world tilt. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. She looked away, tears pooling in her lashes. "Because I can't stay," she said. "Because I don't have much time. Because if you love me, I'll break you." He didn't understand. She stood up and walked away before he could speak further. That was the beginning of the ache. Daniel tried to give her space, but love doesn't switch off like a light. When he saw her the next morning at the bookstore, she avoided meeting his eyes. He bought a book he didn't need and walked out with a hollow in his chest. For days, she grew distant, responding briefly, retreating quickly, building walls faster than he could reach her. It felt like losing someone he hadn't yet fully had. Finally, one cold evening, he found her sitting alone on the bridge again, hugging her knees. Her eyes were red from the wind or from crying. He couldn't tell. He sat beside her silently. After a while, she spoke. "I'm sick, Daniel." The world stopped. "What do you mean?" His voice trembled. She exhaled shakily. "I came to this town because I wanted a place to breathe. Before my illness gets worse. I didn't want people worrying. I didn't want anyone getting close. I didn't want pity." Her lips quivered. "And then you walked into my life. And suddenly, every wall I built started falling." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I didn't plan to love you, but I did. I still do. And that's why I tried to push you away." Daniel felt his heart shatter, yet grow all at once. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms. "You don't get to face this alone. Not anymore. Not as long as I'm breathing," she cried against him, heartbreaking tears. And that night, under the dim streetlights, Daniel promised her he would stay. Alina told him about her condition, how she had been diagnosed a year earlier, how doctors weren't hopeful, how she had chosen to spend the time she had left living peacefully rather than in endless hospitals. Daniel listened, holding her trembling hands. He didn't tell her he was terrified. He didn't tell her he had never felt more helpless. He only told her the truth. "I'm not going anywhere." From then on, their love changed. It grew deeper, heavier, more precious. Every moment felt like borrowed time. Every laugh like a treasure. Every touch like a prayer. Daniel made it his life's purpose to fill her days with light. He took her to all her favorite places, read poetry to her on rainy nights, cooked her meals, she said, tasted like comfort, painted pictures, inspired by her smile. Some days she was strong, smiling, teasing, full of gentle warmth. Other days, she was weak, her body fragile, her energy fading. But never once did she face it alone. One winter morning, snow-blanketed river view like a quiet blessing. Alina woke up feeling breathless and exhausted. Daniel wrapped her in blankets, prepared warm tea, and held her as they watched the snow fall through the window. "I've never liked winter," she murmured, her voice weak. "It always felt lonely." Daniel kissed her forehead. Then, "This winter won't be lonely." She smiled faintly. "You make everything feel less scary." But he could feel the fear growing inside him, the fear of the ticking clock, the fear of losing her, the fear of waking up one day to silence. Despite her illness, Alina insisted on living her days with dignity and beauty. She continued working at the bookstore when she had the strength. Daniel walked her to and from the shop, holding her hand as though it were the most delicate part of his soul. Every evening, they visited the bridge, the place their story began. She said it made her feel alive, watching the sunsets, feeling the wind, listening to the river's endless journey. "I want to be remembered here," she once whispered, "where the sky meets the water." As weeks passed, her health began to decline faster. She grew thinner, tired, often unable to walk long distances. Daniel never complained. He carried her when she couldn't walk, sang to her when she couldn't sleep, and held her. During the nights, she cried silently into his chest. He wished he could take her pain, wished he could rearrange destiny, wished love alone could heal what medicine couldn't. One night, Alina asked him, "Do you ever regret loving me?" He looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Never loving you is the best thing I have ever done." She touched his cheek gently. "I'm sorry for breaking your heart." He kissed her palm. "You didn't break it. You filled it." Spring arrived. Gently flowers blooming, the river flowing more brightly. But Alina's body was fading, her steps slower, her breaths shorter, her laughter softer. Daniel stayed by her side, like a shadow that loved too deeply to leave. Her doctor quietly told him that the time was near. Daniel returned home that evening and cried for hours, desperate sobs into his pillow. But when he saw Alina again, he smiled, because she deserved only light in her final days. One warm evening, when the sky was painted in shades of fading gold, Alina asked him, "Daniel, can we go to the bridge?" He carried her there gently, holding her close. They sat together, her head resting against his shoulder. The river below shimmered, reflecting the colors of the sunset. She looked at him, really looked, and whispered, "Thank you for giving me the kind of love people spend lifetimes searching for." Tears slipped down Daniel's cheeks. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Just a little longer." She squeezed his hand weakly. "I wish I could." The sun dipped below the horizon. Alina's breaths grew slower, softer, and with a final exhale that sounded like a peaceful sigh, her hand loosened in his. Daniel froze. "Alina," he whispered. She didn't answer. The world fell silent. He held her there for hours, his tears falling onto her still face. The night growing colder around them. He pressed his forehead against hers and whispered every word he hadn't said, every prayer he could think of. Riverview mourned with him the next day, quietly, gently, respectfully. Daniel buried her beside a blooming cherry tree, overlooking the river, the place she loved most. Every day, he visited her grave, leaving her favorite flowers and whispering poetry into the wind. He painted a portrait of her smiling, placing it in the bookstore where she once worked. People would stop and smile at the painting, but none of them knew that every brushstroke carried a piece of his heart. Years passed. Daniel never loved anyone again, but he lived the way she had wanted him to, kindly, softly, lovingly. And often, at sunset, he stood on the old bridge, feeling the breeze, closing his eyes, as though waiting for her whisper in the wind. Some love stories don't end with forever. Some end with a memory that lives longer than a lifetime. And Alina became his eternity.